Awesome. Hello, everyone. Today is Tuesday, January 17th, 2023. This is a meeting of the SIG Network Policy API subgroup to SIG Network. This is a CNCF sponsored meeting, so let's follow the rules and be nice to everyone. And yeah, have a good meeting today. So this is the first time that we are meeting at the new meeting time, 9 a.m. PST, 12 p.m. EST, and this is to help facilitate getting more folks here, especially EU contributors and other sort of folks. So happy to see some faces. And yeah, I think the agenda is pretty light today, but I don't know, John, Howard, you haven't been here before. Do you want to kind of give a quick intro, or maybe you have?
No, this is my first time.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I'm from the Istio community, and we've been looking to kind of adding some network policy support. For a while, we've had our own policy, authorization policy is a name, but we're interested in splitting the full L7 authorization policy with kind of the L4, and network policy, of course, does many of the things that we want to kind of have policies over at L4. So we've been kind of looking if we want to make our own resource or use network policy, what would it take to make that happen? And for us, there's kind of a few main gaps, I think, with where network policy is today, with where we would want it to be to use. One of the big ones is service account as kind of a matching criteria. That's kind of the bread and butter for Istio, kind of one of the most important things. I know there had been some discussion in the past. It seemed kind of like it had stalled a bit, but I'm not sure. This is my first time at this meeting. Some other things as well is because we are not like the core CNI, we're kind of running alongside a real CNI. So we were also interested in some ways to kind of make sure that policies that are written for us don't break the main CNI and vice versa. Kind of like an ingress class concept that we have at the ingress layer. So yeah, that's kind of where I was recommended to kind of come, just kind of casually discuss where what we're interested in. So here I am.
That's awesome. Well, great to have you here. And yeah, I think this is the perfect place. So, you touched on a couple things. I think the first one is kind of the network policy selector with service accounts. And like you said, that has been discussed before, but it's been quite some time. And, it would just kind of involve some folks kind of picking it back up. However, there is some prior things that have happened between like the time this was last brought up and now. One of the main ones being is us as a group have kind of concluded it's almost impossible to add new stuff to the existing network policy API for a bunch of backward compatibility reasons and stuff that's kind of documented if you read back through the agenda. So in my opinion, and others can agree or disagree here, I'm happy to hear it. I think network policy v2 is kind of a place we'd like to see new selectors such as service account selectors, maybe service selectors, etc., kind of come into the picture. Obviously that means like a bigger chunk of work. Like we need this community, a group of people here to like really own the network policy v2 effort. And we're always looking for help because currently there's a bunch of stuff people want. There's FQDN, there's these new fully qualified domain name policies. There's these types of new selectors and not really a single entity driving that yet. So that's like a little bit of historical context for you. I don't know if you have any questions, and I don't know if anyone else here is interested and would want to maybe help John kind of hop in on this.
Not an immediate need, but I've been vaguely interested in the applicability of these exact things to some of the Aussie concerns in Gateway API Gamma work. So Gateway API for mesh.
I have been thinking about network policy v2, just like what we might want to do about it, but maybe we'll get to this. But the second half of the proposal has to do with CNI sort of selectively implementing the spec, which is, I guess, a second can of worms.
Yeah. And it's a
that,
little even different in the Istio case, right? Because, sorry, I'm pretty unfamiliar with Istio, to be honest with you. Is it Howard or John? I'm sorry, I'm messing
It's
it up.
John. Yeah.
John.
Well,
Okay,
Howard's my
perfect.
last name. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm looking at your name in Zoom, and it's
Yep.
Howard John. Cool. So yeah, in your case with the Istio case, you said, like, would Istio be implementing this policy outside of the CNI in your case, or it has to be able
Yeah.
to support? But okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, one thing too on what Rahul said about selectively implementing, I didn't mention this earlier, but we'd also probably want to not support source labels as a field. So that's kind of why I mentioned like ingress class. Like my initial thought was like something like a network policy class. I mean, I know you said it's hard to add fields, so this is maybe theoretical than practical for the existing API, but like a network policy class where, you know, they can say, okay, this is the Istio policy, and then if they have you know, source labels, we can just reject it because we don't support that. And then they can add service account types because we support that. A different CNI could do the opposite and, you know, reject service account policies if they don't have support for that. Just an
Right.
initial thought.
Yeah, I think that supportability matrix makes a lot of sense. Raul, you were touching on it, and it's something we can definitely be explicit about in V2. Like, we can follow those designs such as ingress class and do what works for us. But it still kind of boils back to, like, we have a lot of folks coming in and asking for new features, and, you know, it's just a matter of getting someone to spearhead it with this community behind them to help them. And that's like really the stalemate we're at, John, like, in my opinion, at this time. So.
Yeah, totally. That makes sense. One question I do have, if we were to say, we don't want to wait for V2, we're just going to shove like a fake pod label for service account, kind of like that, the namespace label thing.
Mhm.
And like, how terrible is that? Are we, have we committed the cardinal sin of network policy, or is it just kind of an acceptable hack?
Well, if you ask, like, can we create a new, or just out of the box add this to the existing network policy API that's living in Tree, I'd say it's Ricardo, you can chime in here. I'm saying it's probably going to be received as a cardinal sin, like, from our experiences in the past. Like,
yeah, I don't mean in the core. I mean, like, I saw Cilium, for example, like they add like these extra labels, and, you know, it's an appealing step aside. I don't know if that's something that will come back to bite us, you know, down the
Cilium
line.
doesn't change network policy itself, though, do they? Don't they have Cilium network policy, which is a superset?
Well, they have that, but you can also actually put in the pod label section, you can put these labels that don't actually live on the pod. One of those is service account. They're kind of like these synthetic labels that Cilium understands. So it's not actually literally looking at pod labels for the pod label fields. It's looking at like pod labels plus some other info that it adds on the pod.
Yeah, we actually have something like that in OpenShift as well. There's a fake namespace label that matches host network traffic.
yeah, and as to, is that like a cardinal sin? No, I mean, obviously we want to do everything in the upstream. Like, that's the best way to do it. But looking back at even the, like, cluster scope network policy effort, most of these providers, like, had their own hacks downstream because the upstream process was just too slow. And so, you know, at the end of the day, like, we want to align here, but it requires quite a big alignment within the community, and that's not the easiest thing to do. So I guess, like, would we get mad if we saw you doing that? No, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, definitely, that makes sense.
I think that, yeah, the cons on that is that you kind of don't have anymore a standard, right? On each one having its own network policy, custom resource definition. But on the other hand, and doing that like for maybe 2 years, following with then Winship, Jay on the other things, as Andrew raised on that, like we took something like 1.5 years to add a field to promote a field to GA, right? We roll it back another another thing right now, which is status, because it would be just not that useful when you still would have to wait for the CNIs to implement on that. So I was wondering, as you are doing the cluster network policy, Andrew, if it's worth to like start drafting a network policy V2, but not without any commitment on that, like saying, hey, if you wanted to have a new network policy, how this should look like, and like then Winship, as an example, can be really creative with all of the things that he's been saying on the network policy V1 as well. And maybe we say, hey, folks, so this is the way that we think it should look like. We don't want to start the cap, or we don't want to start anything right now, but without having the CNIs committed really with a new network policy that does whatever Google, Red Hat, VMware, and all of them they need. Because otherwise, it's just going to be like us spending time trying to do something that doesn't suit for everyone's needs. And I agree with the CNI ones as well, that it's just probably too slow for them to get new features into network policy. And we saw that happening on Ingress on PASS as well. So Ingresses, they just started to rely more on annotations. What I can see, as Dan said from Red Hat on the CNI of OpenShift and even from Istio, is that we are again hacking on the existing object, but instead of using annotations, just using labels. So maybe we are just bringing the same problem that we had on Ingress to network policy, and in the future it's just going to be bad for users.
I see what you mean. I think that's a really good idea. Like a pre-cap, like let's just design an API and see where it goes.
A brainstorm. Don't call it a cap or an API. Just do a brainstorm. Like, hey, this is how this looks like. People, what do you want to do? If it's possible or not, it's just like something that we should discuss in the future, because I don't think it's gonna exist any of those new fields without existing a network policy V2. And as you've seen, Andrew, as well, like even the cluster network policy, it's something that takes a lot of discussion, a lot of things, and in the end, you just have one specific CNI saying, hey, this doesn't apply to me, or the other one. So it's probably just going to be too painful. Or maybe we should just go back the way that Gateway API they did and say, hey, we do the things really simple. If you want something bigger, then go to the custom resource. They say that they have like an extended version of Gateway API or something like that. I don't remember as well. Like level 1, level 2, level 3. I'm not sure.
Right. They have those different sort of classes, but I think that's still they are doing that after like their initial API is already developed, and like they're looking at adding new features, right? Mike, yeah, you might have.
I can explain a little bit more.
Yeah.
So Gateway API has, I can drop a link in the notes here. There's a couple different variations of how like versioning and conformance happens. The two big ones are the conformance levels that you were talking about. There's core conformance, which is basically all implementations are expected to support this functionality that's marked as core conformance. Extended conformance is kind of a like pick and choose category of, here's a thing you can choose to support any one of maybe a dozen different features. You can support one or many, or sometimes they're mutually exclusive. But if you do, it should behave in a specific way that we have specified and have conformance tests for. And then kind of the third level beyond that is there are a few spots that are marked as implementation specific extensibility. So it's explicitly undefined. You can add your own filter that's specific to Istio mesh or console service mesh or whatever it may be, where you can implement stuff that is not specified and is not part of the conformance suite at all. So that's kind of like an escape hatch to do whatever suits your purposes. And then aside from that, we also have just like releases with the typical Kubernetes like alpha, beta, GA cadence. So specific things get moved up from like alpha to, we have a couple resources are in beta now.
Okay.
It's just stability expectations with those.
And those kind of tiers you have, are they for iterating on an API you've already gotten in via a GEP, or are they like, can someone come in and just like, how do you get a new API type in one of those classes?
Yeah, so I think things would generally start at an implementation specific or extended conformance when you're proposing a new feature. It may start like if it can happen by an implementation without changing the core spec, it can happen in implementation specific, one of those hatches, then potentially get standardized into extended. Or
Okay.
similarly, somebody can start in extended, and then if it's determined that it should be implemented by everybody, it could be promoted to core, but there's definitely not an expectation that everything in extended is going to move to core. Like there's very much, this is things that might make sense for one implementation and not others.
Yeah, no, 100%. Okay. I mean, it's
Oh,
been
and-
on.
And I forgot, we have two channels. We have the experimental channel and the standard release channel. So I'll let John pick up whether things would start in experimental and not move to the standard channel until they're ready. John.
Yeah, I was just going to add, like, one thing that makes it a bit different is the resources are decomposed in Gateway. So for example, like there's HTTP route as core, but then some implementations could have like MySQL route or something, which could just start not even in tree, just like in some random implementation. And then maybe it moves, maybe it doesn't. It's kind of composable. For network
Right.
policy, I'm guessing we would end up with just kind of one resource probably. We can then kind of end up with just the in-field or like new fields type of thing as part of the promotion. Maybe not, but at least it's kind of intuitive to me.
Yeah, I think it's more intuitive, but I do like, the way you can, like an influence or someone outside of the core group can start an API and then say like, what do y'all think about this? Put it in a community centered place. And then if the community likes it, move it in tree. Like that flow seems a lot faster. I mean, it kind of skips the kept flow a little bit, right? But that's not necessarily the worst thing. Sorry, Rahul, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
No worries. I was just curious that like the idea of extensibility via objects, maybe it doesn't make as much semantic sense for admin network policy, but did we ever consider something like that? Like right now we do, like it's a monolithic object with the status field that helps us sort of add new things, right? Like did we consider making it sharded across objects, or was that too confusing?
I mean, we sharded it, but originally there was originally there was a baseline admin network policy, then there wasn't. And now in the actual implementation, there is two objects. There's admin network policies and baseline admin network policies. So slightly sharded, but no, generally we didn't think about like adding new features via new objects. Does that make sense?
Right.
But
yeah,
I mean, it's working for the Gateway API. And like, I always, like, if I ever have a question about this stuff, like I always kind of go back and ask Rob or look at like what the Gateway API folks have done, because they've run into a lot of this. So like, I wouldn't put it out of the question. In my opinion, like where we started this conversation just now, like it all revolves around like the fact, like we have all these features, people want them. We need somewhere to start on a network policy v2. Like maybe that's a working document for now. I think we actually had a working document and it's right here. It's just kind of been dropped. So maybe we need to pick that back up. My whole thing is like with any API or any feature, we just need someone to raise their hand and say like, I will help own this. Not I will do it all, but I will be the one to kind of like push this every week. I will be the one to kind of track what's going on loosely and just kind of help it along. And I know like for me, I can't do it right now, but I'm happy to help facilitate it. So that's kind of where we're at. I think Ricardo's mention of like, let's start it somewhere is really important. Like, let's pick up back up on this doc maybe and see what we can do.
Where is that doc?
It's in the agenda at the top, and I'll bring it back down. It's under important links in the agenda, network policy v2 working doc. And that was actually some folks from Juniper Networks who are not involved anymore, but they, started something, right? And I don't know. Someone, we could look at this and say we don't want to keep going with what they have here. It's just kind of a jumble of notes at this point, and it's pretty broad. We could start something new. I'm pretty open to anything, but this is what we have so far. From this group standpoint, like if I was to just get something started where we could start dumping docs, do we think a Google Docs is a good place, or should it be in a README? Should it be like literal, just start designing types, like a rough outline of an API? Like what would be the best way to facilitate getting this going in y'all's opinion?
I mean, we don't even necessarily all agree on what network policy v2 means at this point. So I think certainly it's not ready for designing API.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean,
I think the doc is a good place to start.
I was gonna say maybe start with saying like, you know, next week or the week after or something, we're going to talk about this, and so everybody should bring their or people should write out their ideas so we have stuff to talk about. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was actually about to say that coming from being someone who's completely new to the history of V2, I would definitely need to do some research and read on this.
Okay, no, that's a good point. I'll look at adding that to the next agenda, and I'll try to run through this document and decide if we want to just make like a clean document, or if I can clean this up a bit, because I know it's a little bit like a lot of just random notes at this point. Cool. And yeah, if anyone wants to help, like please reach out. Like this is definitely an opportunity to like own something pretty big, or help own something pretty big in upstream. So I think it's a really cool opportunity if anyone has time, and if anyone's watching this recording and thinks they have time. And yeah, Ricardo, we can define that word. We do not have to have compatibility with V1.
No, but I'm asking this seriously. I mean, then can chime in on that. But when you have these API migrations that you say, like, I'm going from V1 to V2, Kubernetes has this contract that you should keep compatibility between them, right? So you cannot. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'll just stop. There will never be a network policy V2. When we talk about network policy V2, that's an idea, not an API. Like it's going to have to be a new object. Like
a new name, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking of. Like the same way they did with the gateway and Ingress. So Ingress never was called Ingress V2, was Gateway API because of that. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. So, and we'll be developing this, whatever this new API is. We call it V2 because of legacy, but we'll be developing it in the network policy API repo as CRDs. So it'll be different.
I had a time box to discuss the name of this API like 10 minutes.
Okay.
Otherwise, you're going to spend like 6 months discussing the name, and then
100%.
3
That's
weeks
what
for
we did.
implementation. Yeah.
So we did a cluster network policy. Cool. Okay, so I think we have a good kind of go on. I'm gonna do my best to kind of get this on the agenda for next time, but I could use help, so definitely reach out if you want to help. Okay, moving on. Thanks, John, for bringing that up. I think that was constructive. Hopefully we can actually get something moving. In the meantime, please bring back anything you do in Istio, maybe as a temporary hack. We'd love to see it, so. Okay, the only other things I had on the agenda, one was the admin network policy KEP update from Yang. I gave it a review. I think it's pretty much ready to go in. Obviously just need an LGTM from one of the people with the approved powers. So if we could get that looked at, that would be awesome. Yeah, it's not a huge thing. It's just making sure that the KEP is up to date with what we actually merged in the API.
Yep, I'll review that.
Thank you.
Although I think I don't have approved bits, so that may not matter. But
okay, I didn't know who did, so but I appreciate it. I'm sure you and I have both given it the +1, we'll be good to go. Cool. And then the last thing I want to talk about today was this issue, which has come up a few times, and I was doing some like stale issue triaging and debugging. I thought I'd bring it back up here because it was marked as stale. I see Story has been commenting, Dan's been commenting. This is all around adding a flag to network policy to say enable or disable it. And obviously from our conversation we just had, this is probably something that would go into a next gen network policy, not necessarily the original network policy. It seems like it's worth leaving open. Do others agree, disagree? Do we want to keep it tracked here? I'm kind of open for whatever.
Is the expectation on the bug that this makes it into the current network policy spec? Like, I haven't read the bug, so I don't know what we communicated to them.
The user
So
was requesting a feature for current network policy, yeah, but we haven't really, like, basically you said it would need to be discussed as a CAP, and we haven't committed to anything, so.
and they didn't commit to owning a CAP, right? They just would like this feature.
Yep.
I mean, I guess it sounds
So-
nice as a FR.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, if we do need a CAP to discuss where this would go, right? Like, what would be the potential solutions? It's not like we can just change the existing API, right?
We've tried, and the last thing to do that successfully was Dan with, I think, policy types field, like a long time ago, right?
Well, no,
Um,
I mean, like, we added port ranges, right? Like,
Okay.
it's sort of, I mean, we would have to say that this feature may or may not actually be implemented, and so, you know, setting the disabled flag may or may not actually work, which is, you know, kind of lame, but so yeah, so that, I mean, that's part of why it would be good to have a CAP if we were going to discuss it.
So in your opinion, Dan, like in a case like this where we have someone asking for a feature, like, and maybe the community doesn't have the bandwidth to open a CAP, like, what do we do? Do we just kind of let it sit? Do I keep this issue open? Do I, you know, close it and say, when you're ready to open a CAP, reach back out? How do we handle it?
I mean, I guess I would let the bots age the issue out. And unless you personally find it useful to keep it open as a tracking for things that the network policy working group wants to remember.
Right. That's kind of why I left it open, because it seemed like a good one for a V2, in my opinion. Okay, sounds good. I'm gonna, as part of trying to like get a V2 doc more up to date, I'll hopefully be able to add like a list of things people have asked for, and this will be in that list. So I will leave it open for now. And yeah, if anyone's watching and wants a really good first CAP, this will be fun.
Yeah, I actually wanted to do a CAP and wanted to jump on helping out with this, but if this is dependent on the V2, then it brings us back to the earlier discussion that we were having.
Yeah, I mean, I think this one's a little, like Dan said, it's a little more easier to do than like a new selector. But at the end of the day, like, it'd be really hard for users to know if that has been implemented or not by the CNI. And that's like always the problem we come to, right? So.
Okay, I've got to run too, so.
Yeah, I think that's all we have. So thanks for coming, everyone. It's good to see you all. And hopefully this new meeting time is a little bit better for everyone here. And yeah, I'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks so much.
Thank you all. Thanks, Andrew.
Bye.
Bye.